advocate. The National League of Cities is dedicated to ensuring your best interest is at the forefront of every federal policy, today and for decades to come. And know that NLC will always deliver for you, even when somebody say it can't be done. I want to take a moment to introduce you to our next guest. There's perhaps not one single lawmaker who has been more steadfast in their commitment to ensuring direct local aid to our communities. She understands you are all on the front lines of COVID response and recovery and has been a vocal ally. She's consistently championed the critical role of local government and how we play a role in the financial burdens in America that you've endured. In fact, her latest hashtag, Fund the Front Lines, was used just last week in building support for local aid, which I've now stolen and started using myself. And she will play a critical role in ensuring the American Rescue Plan Act gets across the finish line. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce the 52nd Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Welcome, Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you very much, Clarence. It is my honor to bring greetings to America's city leaders on behalf of the United States House of Representatives, and to do so as Speaker of the House. And I thank you, Clarence, for your kind words and for your leadership as Executive Director of NLC, for your lifelong leadership on behalf of America's cities and communities, bringing your great experience as champion of educational and economic opportunities during your 24 years as mayor of South Bay, Florida, and as the former president and now CEO and executive director of the National League of Cities, representing thousands of cities, towns, and villages from every corner of America. Before I get further into my remarks, I want to address some that you made and say that when you talked about gun violence as one of the priorities that you presented, gun violence prevention, one of the priorities to the administration and to us, that this week we will be voting on that very legislation that calls for background checks, as well as closing the loophole, the South Carolina loophole, Mr. Clyburn's bill and Mr. Thompson's bill. We also last week, as you mentioned, George Floyd, we passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So many of your priorities are our priorities as well, because you've made them known to us. So many of the priorities that you have presented to the administration and your testimony in Congress is very important, because there's so many needs and the prioritization of it is essential. And I thank you for that leadership. I also thank NLC President Kathy Manis of Lexington, South Carolina, talked about the South Carolina loophole, for her visionary leadership, particularly to advance youth civic engagement in our cities. Point of personal privilege for me, let me salute my mayor, San Francisco Mayor London Breed, who's been an inspiring, effective force for good during this time of pandemic and economic crisis. I had the privilege of having a town meeting with her, by phone with thousands of San Franciscans on Friday afternoon, actually, night here. But it was about a day of action for the Rescue Act. We had over 80 of them around the country, and I was pleased to have one with the mayor. I know there are many Californians in on our conversation now, and I bring greetings to them as well. You know, Clarence, tomorrow marks 1 year since I was honored to address city leaders at your 2020 conference. At that time, the coronavirus was accelerating, and House Democrats had passed our first response package. But little could we imagine the horror and heartbreak to come. Actually, our meeting then was the last meeting of before the virus really took hold. Since then, nearly 29 million Americans have been affected, over 500,000 tragically dead, 18 million still on unemployment, and millions more unsure of how to put food on the table and keep roofs over their heads. For you, America's leaders, I know that this pain is personal. As you may know, as I've said before to you, as the sister and daughter of two mayors of Baltimore, I've seen firsthand there's no buffer between you and your communities, that unemployment statistics and infection rates are not numbers to you, but daily devastating realities of your neighbors. Understanding this staggering human toll, the National League of Cities has worked day in and day out to respond, rebuild, and recover. And now, under President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, two leaders who embrace the science and listen to our leaders on the front lines, the American people can know and be assured that help is on the way. Indeed, Saturday was a great day of progress and promise for the American people as the Senate passed the American Rescue Plan. The House we're in the process now. We're going to rules as we speak. We just got the paper from the Senate. It takes a couple of days to get processed. And within days, either tonight or tomorrow, we will pass it, and just a matter of days, it will be on President Biden's desk so that it can be enacted before unemployment benefits expire in under a week from now. The American Rescue Plan is a beacon of hope for America's families and struggling small businesses. It is a decisive action that is needed to save lives and livelihoods, putting vaccines in people's arms, money in their pockets, children safely back in school, and people back to work. The legislation is a strong step forward for our local, state, tribal, and territorial governments. It includes as you know, over $65 billion directly and exclusively for America's cities, no carve-outs for other entities. We're proud to ensure that cities of all sizes receive their own allocation. The 65, the way it is, it's 350. Part of it goes to the state. 130 go to the localities. Half of that, 65 billion, go directly and exclusively to America's citizens. We're proud to ensure that cities of all sizes receive their own allocation, from the largest metropolitan areas to the smallest towns. And we have ensured greater eligibility and, magic word, flexibility, so that you can get funds that were the way that you know best, including addressing revenue loss because of the shut-in and the health and economic impacts of the pandemic. Overall, this coronavirus-centric legislation puts nearly $1 trillion, separate from the money I talked about going to the cities and state, puts nearly $1 trillion in the pockets of the American people. All money that will go directly into your communities, including through direct payments, that check, expanded unemployment insurance, child tax credits, and renter and homeowner assistance. On behalf of the House, I thank you for using your voice to lift up the legislation, including through 300 virtual meetings you're holding on the Hill this week. Your advocacy has helped ensure that the American people know exactly how the American Rescue Plan benefits them, which is why over 75% of the public supports this bill. Republicans, Democrats, Independents. We're so pleased with that. Across the country, it is bipartisan, even though we didn't get any Republican vote in the Senate. I'm hoping to get some today, or maybe it's tomorrow when the bill comes to the floor, depending on how long it takes in the Rules Committee. The livelihoods of our cities, towns, and villages depend on this legislation, which is not just a rescue package, but a recovery, a national investment to build back a better economy. It cuts child poverty in half, lifts 12 million Americans out of poverty, in addition, including children, and creates 7 million new jobs. Build back better. That's what President Biden calls it, and we call it Build Back Better for the people. For the people is our overarching theme. Build back better for the people. We must take additional bold action to build an economy that works for all Americans, to do so in a way that acknowledges the twin realities of income disparity and the climate crisis. And that's why the Democratic House is committed to working with you to move America forward, including with landmark infrastructure bill to create millions of good paying jobs, reimagine and revitalize our transportation infrastructure, expand broadband to every corner of the country, take our nation into clean energy economy for the future, and you all have been on the lead on that, strengthen our resilience against the climate crisis, and honor the federal government's responsibility to local government. At the same time, together, as we build back better, we also must advance justice, opportunity, and progress in every zip code. You mentioned earlier about the human resources that we need to build back better, which is why the House, making our community safer, which is why the House is proud to have passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act last week, as I mentioned. And this week, we will pass common sense gun violence prevention legislation. Making our communities fairer, soon we'll pass legislation securing workers' rights, the PRO Act, and equal pay for equal work. Making our communities more just. This is why we passed the Equality Act to end LGBTQ discrimination. And we'll soon pass, this will be next week, the Dream and Promise Act to ensure that our immigrant communities can continue to strengthen and enrich our country. Nearly 60 years ago, in his State of the Union address, President John F. Kennedy rightly observed, "A strong America depends on its cities." Now, every single day, we see that statement could not be more true. In the face of pandemic and economic crisis, you are on the front lines, leading the fight to save lives and livelihood, following the science. So in addition to everything else that I talked about the money that goes directly to you to address your responsibilities, in addition to that, in this bill, there's a huge amount of about $160 billion for education, which will come into your community, for transportation, for issues, as I mentioned earlier, that relate to rent and home ownership, and also about feeding the hungry. Millions of people in America, I say, are food insecure. My kids say, "Mom, don't say food insecure." They're hungry. They're hungry. Well, the list goes on, whether it's FEMA and other allocations of resources. I'm sure you'll see the full array. But it is all about meeting the needs of the American people, and you are in the front line of doing that. So in the weeks and months ahead, we'll continue to rely on you as our vanguard, marching forward and making progress for all people as the engines of dynamism and drivers of prosperity in America. In our mission to build back better, Congress and the country need your continued committed leadership. We need you as an intellectual resource, as well as a delivery of services to people and organizing for a better future. Thank you all for your courage to move America forward. And thank you for giving me the honor once again to address you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Join us in welcoming our next speaker, former EPA Administrator, now serving as the White House National Climate Advisor, Gina McCarthy.
Hi, everybody. First of all, I have to say that it's always daunting and absolutely never easy to follow Speaker Pelosi. But I do have to say, on the other hand, where she leads, I'm going to follow. So it's exciting to hear her enthusiasm and to always see that every year she serves, she is for the people. And I think that's why I'm always so excited to come back to NLC and to all of the folks who have dedicated so much of their life to working for people, whether it's as a city or a local government leader. And I will tell you that I spent my first 11 years in public service, followed by many decades more, working at the local level. And it was the best job I ever had, as well as, frankly, the most difficult one. because you can't avoid looking at the challenges you're facing and having to explain to people what you're doing for them every single day. And so it's a fulfilling work, but also challenging. And so I'm really excited to talk to you about what we see as both our challenges and opportunities at the federal level right now to deal with some of the most compelling challenges that we are facing right now. And so one of them is clearly the climate crisis, which I know that many of you are seeing play out on the ground day in and day out, with threats that are really gripping our communities and frankly, communities across the globe. And so President Biden, when he was running for office, realized that he had to come out with a strong climate action plan. But he also had to realize how he recognized that we're facing a number of crises today, and we need to have those crises front and center in terms of how we're going to strategize moving forward. And this is the exciting part about the dots he's connected and about the intersectionality between the public health challenge of our pandemic, the challenge of racism and equity that we need to keep front and center of all of the efforts that we are undertaking, and the challenge of regrowing our economy, making it stable again, which means those nearly 10 million people who are out of work today need to have jobs, not in the future, but they need to have jobs tomorrow. So as I was tasked to take on this wonderful role of looking at how we could advance our opportunities to address the climate challenge, the president made it very clear to me, as well as to everybody in the public, that when he hears the issue of climate change, what he thinks about is jobs, jobs, jobs. He thinks about not just any job, but good jobs, and how we create a whole of government approach to investing in our clean energy future in a way that is not going to leave any community or any worker behind. And of course, this is a very challenging opportunity, but it is in fact an opportunity. It's a moment for this president, President Biden, to stop thinking about our addressing climate change as an ask to sacrifice as much as delivering benefits and new opportunities across our country, in every state, in every city, in every local community. Because he knows that cities and local communities are where all of the action starts. You know it and I know it. I've worked at the local level, the state level, and the federal level, and I know that the most creative and the most compelling programs and projects and processes and laws begin actually at the local level where innovation thrives. And it always happens that it keeps inching up into states and then into the federal government, where finally the rest of us think we've come up with a brilliant idea, when really it's just an understanding of what works and what's already been proven. So I want to remind you of a couple of things. Number one, you're not just the engine of innovation, but you have been incredibly meaningful participants in our climate efforts as we move forward. And we are going to continue to make sure that cities and local communities are part of the process that the federal government is going to understand and communicate and put into action on how we address this climate crisis, with our eyes wide open to who benefits. Are we getting money to the environmental justice communities, the communities that have been left behind? Are we getting them first in line for those benefits? Are we thinking about how we use this as a stimulus for job growth, and how we can work together to advance this country and build its leadership once again on climate across the globe? And I want to remind you that back in 2015, when we were in Paris, many of you were there. In fact, the National League of Cities led the largest delegation of city officials to the Paris Climate Convention, and you were some of the loudest and most fun voices that were actually demanding climate action. And it led to really the adoption of a historic Paris Agreement. And then when we had the prior administration come in and decide that climate was something they weren't going to actually address, but instead deny, you stood up. And you stood up and said, listen, we know what the science says. We understand the challenge of climate. And you said that we are all in. And so we watched you hold the fort on so many of the progressive actions that we had taken already and keep progress moving forward in a way that made sense to your communities, made sense to your cities, and helped to benefit them while we were continuing to have the U.S. provide leadership internationally that we could all celebrate moving forward. And now, 5 years after the Paris Agreement, we had been absent for 4, and guess what? We are now back in. If you remember, President Biden committed during his campaign that we were rejoining Paris, and we know now that we have already joined, and we are back in action in every sector of our economy, thinking about the way forward to have the commitment to the international community we need, and thinking about how we benefit in this moment of hope and opportunity. Yes, I know I'm saying hope and opportunity, but that's because we finally have a package that the speaker just outlined, that is the American Rescue Plan, that is really going to move us forward to address the pandemic and provide us the resources we need to move forward as a country. And now the fun begins, which is how do we initiate a whole of government approach to begin to address climate change and to think of it as a moment of recovery, a moment of economic growth, a moment of creating an economy that is safe and sustainable, one that's going to reach every community across this country using every tool of the U.S. government to make our climate strategy work for every community and every worker. And this is a large task indeed, but one that nobody is going to shy away from. President Biden had one of the most aggressive climate plans that we have ever seen. He actually is calling for clean energy by 2035. How can he be sure that's going to happen? Because it's been happening. Because clean energy is where the job growth was before the pandemic hit. And we know it has continued at a steady pace to go farther and faster because it's cost effective, because it can help people in every community to afford to live a better life and afford home ownership over the long term. And we need to support those goals because this is what we mean about rebuilding the middle class. This is what we mean about growing jobs. Every time we ask for a building to be more efficient or we ask for a building to look at opportunities for clean energy, we are talking about job growth, job growth, job growth. And we are excited to be working already with the utility sector to design a strategy moving forward. So now that we have moved past and are going to implement the rescue plan, we are talking about building back better. We are talking about recovery. And I am optimistic that we are going to make this work in a way that's going to benefit every community. We are talking about opportunities, not just to move forward on housing or utilities. We're talking about infrastructure jobs, investments in America again. That's not just roads and bridges, but it's investment on how we're going to empower America to compete in a global economy, grab the supply chains that we have let dwindle and move offshore and grab those back again so that we can meet the challenge of job growth while at the same time addressing the issues of climate change. How? with auto manufacturing jobs that are growing the vehicles of the future. We are talking about cleaner vehicles that are going to make your air pollution challenges less onerous for the health of your community. We are talking about bringing parts and materials and battery storage so that they're manufactured in the United States of America once again. We're talking about investments in transit. We're talking about power sector jobs that are based on a clean energy economy. We're talking about building jobs, not just plumbers, but electricians, real on-the-ground human beings that have an ability to join a union to ensure that they are going to have stable and well-paid jobs well into the future. We are not going to accept 1 or 2 check marks. We want it all, which is why the whole of government approach is bringing together every agency, asking them what they can do for the American public, not just to address climate, but to advance job growth, to take a look at who's benefiting. President Biden has committed that 40% of his investments in clean energy are going to benefit the communities left behind, the brown, black communities, the poor communities, the indigenous populations that have been left behind for far too long. We are talking about lasting, equitable jobs. Nothing else should suffice. And so what can we do as a whole of government? Well, we have a domestic climate office that's all about bringing these agencies together, looking at their policies, their practices, what they're investing in. We're talking about new investment opportunities with a recovery package. We are talking about an opportunity to empower human beings that have been left behind and to build the economy of the future that we need. We're talking about manufacturing jobs in the middle of the country. We're talking about re-engaging with our farmers and our agriculture community to make sure that we're providing healthy food to those who need it while we're protecting our water quality and our air. We are talking about vehicle fleets that have plenty of charging stations. Now, if you're worried that electric vehicles may not be the future, I'd have you talk to any of the car companies because they'll tell you that it has to be, because every country in the world is now investing in energy infrastructure. They're investing in electric vehicles. We need to capture those markets, which is why President Biden is going to be constructing 500,000 charging stations to make sure that these vehicles are going to be suitable for every customer in the United States. And we're going to be looking at opportunities to lower the cost of those vehicles so that they're affordable to everyone. We're looking at long haul trucks where there's all kinds of opportunities for different types of energy resources that will lower, again, that air pollution and lower the cost of those vehicles and lower the upkeep, the necessary kind of maintenance that you do over and over. So we are excited about the opportunities today. We are all in terms of moving this forward. And let me wrap up because I know that there are always challenges that we have to face together. But I know that local communities and cities are struggling today. This is not a time of sacrifice. It's a time for hope. The best 4-letter word in the dictionary. It's hope. And we are going to bring that to every city and every local community in every state in the United States of America. We're going to tell you that we understand that the sacrifice needs to stop, and we are going to provide you an opportunity to move forward together. President Biden has a vision for an energy future that is clear. He has made strong commitments to achieve net zero by 2050, not because he thinks it's going to be difficult, but he knows that if we work together as the complete United States of America, then we will be able to achieve this and as a result, strengthen our ability as a country to work together again to the benefit of all people. And again, nobody should have to be left behind. All of us should have to prosper. So again, I know I may sound like an eternal optimist, but I've worked in government now for almost 40 years. And it's because of my commitment to public service that I have a strong commitment to President Biden. He is a labor president. He is a man whose values he wears on his sleeve. He wants to make sure that as we buy products and as we design programs and as we make investments, that it's all about the people. So I'm excited to be working with you again. I know we'll have plenty of time to talk, but rest assured that we know the value that local communities and cities provide to this country. And we are going to invest in you to create a vision for your communities and your cities that is going to meet the needs of your communities. Thank you very much.
Please welcome back to the stage, Clarence Anthony.
Good afternoon, everyone. What a conference we've had the last 3 days. Can you believe we are almost at the end? Before we close today's general session, we have one more conversation, and a critical one at that. The value of public-private partnerships related to entrepreneurship, small businesses, and addressing financial deserts. I want to invite to the virtual stage, Franz Poshaw. Hey, Franz, how are you?